Zephyr 97 floated in the command chamber of the hegemony's most prestigious battlecruiser, watching the tactical displays with growing unease. The crystalline being's photonic core pulsed with nervous energy as reports streamed in from across the Outer Rim territories. Another system had fallen. Another fleet had been scattered to the cosmic winds. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Admiral Zephyr, came the melodic tones of Subcommander Lyrian, whose gaseous form shimmered near the communication array. We have received confirmation from the Andorian defense grid. The human vessels have broken through the Kepler junction. Estimated casualties are significant. Zephyr's crystalline structure darkened. 3 months ago, when the humans had first ventured beyond their small corner of the galaxy, the galactic hegemony had barely taken notice. Earth was a backwater world populated by a primitive species that had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel. Their ships were crude, their weapons antiquated, and their understanding of galactic politics laughably naive. The first contact protocols had been standard. The hegemony's diplomatic envoys had approached the human homeworld with the usual terms: surrender sovereignty, accept client species status, and contribute resources and manpower to the greater galactic order. It was a process that had been repeated across 1,000 worlds over the past millennium. Some species negotiated. Some resisted briefly before capitulating. None had ever responded quite like the humans. Absolutely not, had been the response from the human diplomatic vessel. Not a request for better terms. Not an attempt at negotiation. Just a flat, unequivocal refusal delivered with the kind of casual confidence that suggested they didn't fully understand what they were rejecting. Zephyr had reviewed the recordings of that first meeting dozens of times. The human ambassador, a female designated as Sarah Chun, had listened to the hegemony's terms with what appeared to be polite attention. When the envoys finished their presentation, she had smiled, a peculiar biological expression that involved baring teeth, and said simply, "We appreciate the offer, but humanity will remain independent. We're not interested in your empire." The hegemony's response had been swift, and they assumed decisive. The humans controlled only 17 systems, had a fleet of perhaps 300 vessels, and possessed technology that was generations behind galactic standard. The third fleet, comprising over 2,000 ships of a line, had been dispatched to bring the humans into compliance. It should have been a simple police action, concluded within days. That had been 12 weeks ago. "Show me the latest intelligence reports," Zephyr commanded, and the holographic displays around the command chamber shifted to show tactical assessments from the front lines. What Zephyr saw defied everything the hegemony understood about warfare. The human vessels moved like nothing in the galactic databases. Where hegemony ships relied on massive energy shields and overwhelming firepower, human craft seemed to dance between attacks, their movements unpredictable and erratic. They struck fast and hard, then vanished into the void before response forces could engage. "These tactical patterns make no sense," Subcommander Lyrian observed, studying the data streams. "Their vessels appear to deliberately expose themselves to enemy fire, only to somehow avoid destruction. Our strategic algorithms cannot predict their next moves." Zephyr had reached the same conclusion. Human military doctrine seemed to violate every principle of sound tactical thinking. They fought with a reckless abandon that should have resulted in catastrophic losses, yet somehow they continued to emerge victorious from engagements they had no business surviving. The most disturbing reports came from the survivors of those encounters. Hegemony crews described human pilots performing maneuvers that should have liquefied any biological occupants. They spoke of human ships continuing to fight even after sustaining damage that would have crippled any other vessel. Most unsettling of all were the accounts of human warriors who seemed to thrive in the chaos of battle, becoming more effective as situations grew more desperate. "Admiral," came another communication from the sensor array. "Long-range scanners are detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the Rigel system. Configuration matches human fleet formations." Zephyr's core pulsed brighter. The Third Fleet had been attempting to establish a blockade around the Rigel system for the past week. trying to prevent human forces from linking up with rebel elements in the outer colonies. If humans were massing ships in that region, it could only mean one thing. How many vessels? Zephyr asked, though the crystalline being was beginning to suspect the answer would not be pleasant. Scanners show at least 400 human ships, Admiral. But the formations are unusual. They appear to be organizing into assault groups rather than defensive positions. 400 ships. The humans were not attempting to break out of the Rigel system. They were preparing to attack. But attack what? The Third Fleet still outnumbered them 5-1, and hegemony vessels possess superior firepower and defenses. Any direct assault should result in human annihilation. Zephyr accessed the tactical computers and began running probability assessments. Every calculation reached the same conclusion. A human attack against the Third Fleet would be suicide. The mathematics were unforgiving. Even accounting for the tactical unpredictability that humans had demonstrated, the odds of success were negligible. Yet as Zephyr studied the energy signatures emanating from Rigel, something felt wrong. The human formations weren't behaving like a desperate force preparing for a final stand. The scanner readings suggested ships moving with purpose and confidence, as if they possessed information that the hegemony lacked. Subcommander, have our intelligence divisions identified any new human weapons systems or technological developments? Lyrian's gaseous form swirled as the being accessed recent reports. Negative, Admiral. Human technology remains primitive by our standards. Their ships still rely on chemical propulsion and kinetic weapons. Energy shielding is minimal. Armor plating is crude metallic composites. This was what troubled Zephyr most. By every measurable standard, human military technology was inferior. Their ships were slower, their weapons less powerful, their defenses weaker. Yet somehow they continued to achieve impossible victories against superior forces. Either the hegemony's understanding of warfare was fundamentally flawed, or the humans possessed some advantage that wasn't showing up in tactical assessments. Admiral, incoming priority transmission from High Command. The central display shifted to show the imposing figure of Supreme Admiral Corvin, whose multi-limbed form filled the communication screen. The ancient being's cybernetic implants glowed with harsh light as data streams flowed directly into Corvin's consciousness. Zephyr 9-7, I trust you have reviewed the latest battlefield reports. Yes, Supreme Admiral. The situation continues to develop in unexpected ways. Unexpected is a diplomatic term for catastrophic failure, Corvin replied, the being's voice carrying undertones that suggested barely controlled fury. The Third Fleet has lost over 300 vessels in the past month. Entire battle groups have been eliminated by forces that should not have been capable of such destruction. Zephyr's crystalline structure dimmed with acknowledgement. The losses were indeed catastrophic, but they were also inexplicable. Human forces seemed to appear from nowhere, strike with devastating effectiveness, and disappear before hegemony ships could respond. Traditional pursuit tactics had proven useless, as human vessels could somehow navigate hazardous regions of space that would destroy conventional ships. Were your orders, Supreme Admiral? The Hegemony Council has authorized the deployment of the First Armada. Admiral Thane will arrive in your sector within 72 hours with 5,000 ships of the line. This human insurgency will be crushed through overwhelming force. 5,000 ships. Zephyr had never seen such a massive deployment used against a single species. The First Armada was typically reserved for conflicts against major galactic powers or large-scale rebellions spanning multiple sectors. Using it against humanity seemed like using a planetary bombardment system to eliminate a small ground installation. Supreme Admiral, do you believe such force is necessary? Human fleets number only in the hundreds. Corvin's multiple eyes focused on Zephyr with uncomfortable intensity. The numbers are irrelevant. These humans fight like nothing we have encountered in 1,000 years of galactic expansion. Our tactical computers cannot predict their movements. Our psychological warfare specialists cannot understand their motivations. They show no fear of superior numbers, no concern for overwhelming odds, and no willingness to accept reasonable surrender terms. The communication paused as Corvin accessed additional data streams. But most concerning are the reports from our intelligence operatives. Humans do not appear to view this conflict as we do. Where we see a police action to bring a client species into compliance, they perceive an existential threat to their independence. This changes their entire approach to warfare. Zephyr processed this information with growing unease. The hegemony's expansion had always relied on species recognizing the futility of resistance. Once confronted with superior numbers and technology, most civilizations accepted client status as preferable to annihilation. But humans seem to operate under different assumptions entirely. What makes you believe the First Armada will succeed where the Third Fleet has struggled? Because Admiral Thane understands something that previous commanders have overlooked. Humans are not fighting a conventional war. They are fighting for survival. This makes them incredibly dangerous, but it also makes them predictable in certain ways. Thane has experience dealing with species that refuse to acknowledge military realities. The communication ended, leaving Zephyr alone with troubling thoughts. The crystalline being had spent centuries studying galactic military history, and something about this human conflict felt fundamentally different from previous campaigns. Other species had fought desperately when faced with conquest, but their desperation had ultimately led to predictable tactical errors. Humans seemed to become more effective as their situation grew more desperate. Subcommander, access the historical databases. I want detailed analysis of every species that has successfully resisted hegemony expansion for more than 30 days. Lyrian's form shifted as the being compiled the requested information. Database search complete, Admiral. In the past millennium, only 7 species have maintained organized resistance for more than 30 standard days. All were eventually brought into compliance or eliminated. Show me their tactical patterns during the final phases of resistance. The holographic displays filled with data streams showing the death throes of civilizations. In every case, the pattern was similar. Initial fierce resistance followed by increasingly desperate tactics, strategic errors born of hopelessness, and, finally, collapse as command structures disintegrated under pressure. But humans weren't following this pattern. If anything, their tactics were becoming more sophisticated and effective over time. They seemed to be learning from each engagement, adapting their strategies to exploit hegemony weaknesses that previous enemies had never recognized. Admiral, sensors are detecting movement from the human formations near Rigel. They appear to be breaking into smaller groups and moving toward different vectors. Zephyr studied the tactical display as human ships scattered across multiple approach routes. This was another example of the confusing human doctrine. Dividing forces in the face of superior numbers was normally suicide, yet humans consistently used such tactics to devastating effect. Track their movements and maintain long-range surveillance. Do not engage until we understand their intentions. As the human formations disappeared into the void, Zephyr wondered whether the hegemony truly understood what they were facing. For a millennium, galactic expansion had followed predictable patterns. Species either submitted immediately or resisted briefly before accepting inevitable defeat. But humans seemed to reject the very concept of inevitable defeat. Perhaps that was what made them so dangerous. They fought not because they expected to win, but because they refused to lose. It was a distinction that Zephyr was only beginning to understand, and one that would prove far more significant than anyone in the hegemony could imagine. The war with humanity was just beginning, and already nothing was proceeding according to plan. When Earthborn fighters went to war, I learned why even the heavens tremble. Part 2. Admiral Thane surveyed the First Armada from the bridge of the hegemony flagship Eternal Dominion. The massive vessel stretched for kilometers in every direction, its hull bristling with weapons systems that could reduce planets to cosmic dust. Around it, 5,000 warships maintained perfect formation, their combined firepower representing the accumulated military might of 1,000 conquered worlds. The Admiral's augmented consciousness processed tactical data streams from across the fleet, while his organic components focused on the peculiar challenge of human warfare. Thane had commanded successful campaigns against 43 species over the past 3 centuries. None had required such overwhelming force deployment. Fleet Admiral, reported Tactical Coordinator Voss, whose insectoid form clicked rhythmically as it processed incoming data. Long-range sensors have identified the human fleet positions. They appear to have scattered across 17 different star systems. Thane accessed the tactical displays directly through his neural interfaces. The human deployment pattern defied conventional military logic. Instead of concentrating their forces to maximize defensive capabilities, they had dispersed across a region spanning hundreds of light years. Any single hegemony battle group could eliminate the scattered human formations without significant losses. Coordinator, what is your assessment of this deployment strategy? Voss's antennae twitched with uncertainty. The pattern suggests either complete tactical incompetence or a strategy beyond our current understanding. Dispersing forces in this manner typically indicates preparation for retreat or surrender. But Thane had studied the human campaigns extensively. These beings did not retreat, and they certainly did not surrender. Their scattered formations suggested something else entirely, though the Admiral struggled to identify what advantage such positioning might provide. Commence Operation Iron Fist. Deploy battle groups Alpha through Gamma to the nearest human concentrations. Maintain overwhelming numerical superiority in each engagement. Destroy any human vessels that refuse to surrender. As the massive hegemony formations began moving toward their targets, Thane reflected on the intelligence reports that had convinced the High Council to authorize such extreme measures. Humans fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness. They seemed to view battlefield survival as secondary to tactical objectives, resulting in behaviors that no rational species would consider acceptable. The first engagement reports arrived within hours. Battle Group Alpha had encountered a human formation near the Proxima Nebula consisting of 37 vessels. The hegemony force outnumbered them 12-1 and possessed vastly superior firepower. Victory should have been achieved within minutes. Instead, the battle had lasted for 6 hours. "Show me the combat recordings," Thane commanded, and the bridge displays filled with footage from the engagement. What Thane witnessed challenged everything he understood about space warfare. The human ships moved through the nebula's radiation fields with impossible precision, using the hazardous environment to mask their movements and disrupt hegemony sensors. When hegemony forces attempted to follow, their sophisticated shielding systems malfunctioned in the intense radiation, leaving them vulnerable to human attacks. But it was the individual human pilots that truly defied comprehension. They flew their vessels directly into weapon fire that should have vaporized their ships, somehow threading through defensive patterns that targeting computers had calculated as impenetrable. Their movements seemed random, yet they consistently positioned themselves to exploit microscopic gaps in hegemony formations. How did they navigate through our defensive screens? Thane asked. Voss studied the tactical data with growing bewilderment. Analysis indicates that human pilots are not using computational assistance for navigation. They appear to be relying on intuitive responses to battlefield conditions. Intuitive responses. Thane processed this concept with difficulty. Every species in the hegemony relied on sophisticated computer systems to manage the complex calculations required for space combat. Attempting to fight based on intuition alone would be suicide against advanced targeting systems and automated defenses. Yet humans seem to thrive under such conditions. Their ships danced through weapon fire with a fluidity that suggested they were somehow predicting enemy movements in real time. More disturbing still, they appeared to improve their performance as battle conditions became more chaotic and dangerous. What were our losses in the Alpha engagement? 47 vessels destroyed, 112 severely damaged. Human losses were 31 vessels destroyed, 6 captured intact. Thane's augmented consciousness recoiled from the implications. Battle Group Alpha had possessed overwhelming advantages in numbers, technology, and firepower, yet they had suffered greater losses than their supposedly primitive opponents. The mathematics of this outcome seemed impossible. Show me reports from battle groups Beta and Gamma. The results were similarly disturbing. In each case, hegemony forces had achieved tactical victory by eliminating human resistance, but the cost had been far higher than any strategic planning had anticipated. Human vessels seemed designed to inflict maximum damage even while being destroyed, and human crews fought with such determination that several ships had continued attacking even after sustaining critical damage. Most concerning were the reports of human boarding actions. When hegemony vessels were disabled but not destroyed, human crews had somehow managed to board and capture them despite being vastly outnumbered. The captured ships were then turned against their former fleet mates with devastating effectiveness. Fleet Admiral, reported communications specialist Diren, whose energy-based consciousness flickered with urgency. We are receiving surrender requests from multiple hegemony vessels across all 3 engagement zones. This was unprecedented. Hegemony crews were genetically and cybernetically conditioned for loyalty and courage. The concept of surrendering to primitive humans should have been psychologically impossible. Explain these surrender requests. The reports indicate the human boarding parties are somehow convincing our crews to defect. Analysis of their communication intercepts suggests humans are not using coercion or mind control techniques. They appear to be simply talking to our personnel. Talking to them. Thane found this possibility even more disturbing than the tactical defeats. The hegemony maintained order through careful psychological conditioning and social engineering. The idea that humans could somehow overcome a millennium of cultural programming through conversation defied everything the Admiral understood about species integration. What are these humans saying to our crews? Diren's energy form pulsed with uncertainty. Preliminary analysis indicates they're discussing concepts of individual freedom, personal choice, and species independence. They seem to be suggesting that our crews could choose different lives if they were not bound by hegemony authority. Choose different lives. The concept was so alien to hegemony, thinking that Thane struggled to process it. Every being in the Empire understood their role and function from birth. The idea of choosing a different existence was not merely impractical. It was incomprehensible. Yet somehow humans were making this impossible concept seem appealing to conditioned hegemony personnel. This suggested that human influence extended far beyond military capability. They possessed some form of ideological weapon that could undermine the fundamental assumptions upon which galactic civilization was built. Fleet Admiral, long-range scanners are detecting unusual energy signatures from the outer system perimeter. Configuration suggests massive human fleet movements. Thane accessed the sensor data directly and felt his augmented consciousness struggle to interpret what it was seeing. The energy signatures indicated the presence of thousands of human vessels, far more than intelligence estimates suggested they possessed. They were emerging from regions of space that should have been impossible to navigate, appearing as if from nowhere. How many human ships are we detecting? Current count exceeds 2,000 vessels, Fleet Admiral. But the formations are continuing to grow as additional ships emerge from sensor shadows. 2,000 ships. Intelligence had estimated total human fleet strength at fewer than 400 vessels. Either the estimates had been catastrophically wrong, or humans possess construction capabilities that defied belief. Coordinator Voss, how is this level of ship production possible? Humans control only 17 star systems with limited industrial infrastructure. Voss's form clicked rapidly as it processed industrial assessments. Analysis indicates that human construction methods are fundamentally different from standard galactic practices. They appear to be building warships using techniques optimized for speed rather than sophistication. Speed rather than sophistication. Thane began to understand the implications. Where hegemony vessels required years to construct due to their complex systems and advanced technologies, humans seem to be producing ships with basic but effective capabilities in a fraction of the time. Quantity was becoming quality through sheer, overwhelming numbers. But this raised another disturbing possibility. If humans could produce ships so rapidly, then every engagement that failed to achieve complete victory would ultimately favor human forces. They could replace losses faster than the hegemony could eliminate them. Fleet Admiral, came another urgent communication. We are receiving reports of human attacks on hegemony supply convoys and industrial installations across 7 sectors. The attacks appear to be coordinated across vast distances. 7 sectors. Thane's consciousness reeled from the implications. Coordinating military operations across such distances required communication systems and logistical capabilities that supposedly primitive humans should not possess. Yet somehow they were managing to strike multiple targets simultaneously across a region spanning thousands of light years. Show me the attack patterns. The tactical displays filled with data streams showing human raids across the outer territories. The attacks seemed random at first glance, but deeper analysis revealed a disturbing pattern. Humans were systematically targeting the infrastructure that supported hegemony expansion, focusing on supply lines, communication relays, and industrial facilities rather than purely military targets. This represented a sophisticated understanding of galactic logistics that contradicted everything known about human capabilities. They were not simply fighting to defend their territory. They were actively working to undermine hegemony power throughout the region. How are they obtaining intelligence about our supply networks and industrial installations? Voss processed the question with visible difficulty. Unknown, Fleet Admiral. These facilities are classified at the highest levels, with access restricted to senior command personnel. Either humans possess intelligence gathering capabilities beyond our detection, or they are receiving information from sources within the hegemony itself. Sources within the hegemony. The possibility that humans had somehow infiltrated galactic command structures was almost too disturbing to consider. Yet the precision of their attacks suggested detailed knowledge of hegemony operations that could only come from internal sources. Thane began to realize that the human conflict represented something far more dangerous than a simple territorial dispute. These beings were not merely defending their independence. They were actively challenging the fundamental assumptions upon which galactic civilization was based. Their very existence suggested that species could thrive without accepting hegemony authority, and their success in combat demonstrated that superior technology and numbers did not guarantee victory. Fleet Admiral, incoming priority transmission from Supreme Command. The bridge displays shifted to show the imposing figure of High Chancellor Zirian, whose crystalline form pulsed with harsh geometric patterns. The ancient being's consciousness encompassed the strategic oversight of the entire galactic empire, making this direct communication highly unusual. Admiral Thane, I trust you have reviewed the latest intelligence assessments regarding human capabilities? Yes, High Chancellor. The situation has proven more complex than initial projections suggested. Complex is an inadequate term for civilizational crisis, Zirian replied, the being's harmonic tones carrying undertones of barely controlled alarm. Human influence is spreading beyond their territorial boundaries. We are receiving reports of rebellion and unrest from client species across multiple sectors. The implications hit Thane like a physical blow. If humans were somehow inspiring rebellion among established hegemony client species, the threat extended far beyond military considerations. The stability of the entire galactic order could be at stake. What are your orders, High Chancellor? Human expansion must be contained immediately. The Council has authorized the deployment of the Omega Protocol. Admiral Zirian will arrive in your sector with 10,000 vessels and authorization to use any necessary means to eliminate the human threat. 10,000 vessels. The largest military deployment in hegemony history, exceeding the forces used to conquer entire galactic sectors. Thane struggled to comprehend how a single primitive species had managed to provoke such an overwhelming response. High Chancellor, do you believe such measures are necessary? Zirian's crystalline structure flashed with dangerous patterns. Admiral Thane, These humans represent an existential threat to galactic civilization. They fight not merely for territory or resources, but for concepts that could undermine the foundation of our society. If their ideas spread, the consequences could destabilize 1,000 years of ordered expansion. The communication ended, leaving Thane alone with the growing realization that humanity represented something unprecedented in galactic history. They were not simply another species to be conquered or integrated. They were a fundamental challenge to the assumptions that had governed galactic civilization for millennia. As reports continued to stream in from across the battle zones, Thane began to understand why even the hegemony's most advanced strategic systems seemed incapable of predicting human behavior. These beings operated according to principles that existed outside the mathematical frameworks used to model rational decision-making. They fought not because victory was probable, but because defeat was unacceptable. They sacrificed not because the costs were reasonable, but because the alternatives were intolerable. They persevered not because success was guaranteed, but because surrender was impossible. For the first time in 3 centuries of military service, Admiral Thane found himself wondering whether the hegemony had encountered an enemy it could not defeat. The thought was so alien to his conditioned thinking that his consciousness struggled to process it fully. But as he watched the tactical displays showing human forces continuing to grow and spread across multiple sectors, Thane began to suspect that the galaxy was about to witness something that had not occurred in over a millennium, the beginning of the end of hegemony expansion. The humans were not merely fighting a war. They were starting a revolution. Hashtag, when Earthborn fighters went to war, I learned why even the heavens tremble. Hashtag part 3 High Admiral Zirian materialized within the quantum consciousness chamber aboard the fortress ship Eternal Supremacy, the largest vessel ever constructed by the hegemony. The crystalline being's form flickered through probability matrices as 10,000 warships arranged themselves in battle formation across the void. Around them, the accumulated firepower of dozens of conquered civilizations awaited deployment against a single troublesome species. The Admiral's multidimensional awareness processed tactical data from across 17 sectors simultaneously while contemplating the unprecedented situation that had prompted this massive deployment. In 1,000 years of galactic expansion, no single species had required such overwhelming force to bring into compliance. Yet intelligence reports suggested that even these extreme measures might prove insufficient. Supreme Admiral, resonated the harmonic frequencies of Strategic Coordinator Prime Altair, whose energy-based consciousness interfaced directly with the fleet's tactical networks. Preliminary reconnaissance indicates that human fleet strength has grown to exceed 4,000 vessels. They have established fortified positions across 47 star systems. 47 systems. Zirian's consciousness recoiled from the implications. 3 months ago, humans had controlled 17 systems with limited military capabilities. Their expansion rate defied every mathematical model used to predict species development. Either human industrial capacity had been catastrophically underestimated, or they possessed construction methods that fundamentally differed from galactic standard practices. Coordinator, what analysis exists regarding human construction capabilities? Altair's energy patterns shifted to access industrial intelligence databases. Recent reconnaissance indicates that humans are utilizing construction methods based on modular assembly and standardized components. Rather than building sophisticated individual vessels, they appear to be mass-producing functional ships optimized for rapid deployment. Mass production. Zirian contemplated this concept with growing unease. Hegemony military doctrine emphasized technological superiority through advanced systems and sophisticated design. Each warship represented years of careful engineering and precision manufacturing, resulting in vessels of unmatched capability but limited production rates. Humans seem to have adopted the opposite approach. Their ships were crude by galactic standards, but they could produce them in quantities that overwhelmed conventional tactical planning. Numbers were becoming a form of technology in itself, transforming quantity into strategic advantage. Show me current intelligence regarding human military doctrine. The quantum chamber filled with data streams displaying analysis from hundreds of engagements across multiple sectors. What Zirian observed challenged fundamental assumptions about rational warfare. Human tactics consistently violated principles of sound military strategy, yet they achieved outcomes that sophisticated strategic computers had calculated as impossible. Most disturbing was the apparent evolution of human capabilities. Early encounters had shown them to be fierce, but predictable opponents. Recent engagements revealed something far more dangerous. Humans were learning from each battle, adapting their strategies to exploit weaknesses in hegemony doctrine that had never before been identified. Coordinator, explain how primitive beings are developing countermeasures to weapon systems that required centuries of technological advancement to create. Altair's consciousness flickered with uncertainty. Analysis suggests that humans are not attempting to match our technological sophistication. Instead, they appear to be identifying fundamental assumptions in our strategic thinking and exploiting the vulnerabilities those assumptions create. Fundamental assumptions. Zirian processed this concept with growing alarm. Hegemony military doctrine was based on mathematical principles that had proven effective across 1,000 campaigns. The idea that primitive humans could identify flaws in strategies that had conquered galaxies seemed impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. Supreme Admiral, came an urgent communication from the sensor arrays. Long-range detection systems are identifying massive energy signatures approaching from multiple vectors. Configuration suggests coordinated human fleet movements across 7 different approach routes. 7 approach routes. Zirian accessed the sensor data directly and felt the Admiral's consciousness struggle to comprehend what it was detecting. Human forces were converging on the hegemony position from impossible distances, their movements suggesting coordination across regions of space that should have required months to traverse. How are humans managing to coordinate operations across such vast distances? Unknown, Supreme Admiral. Human communication systems are primitive by our standards, yet they appear capable of near-instantaneous coordination across interstellar distances. Either they possess technology beyond our detection capabilities, or they are utilizing methods that exist outside our current understanding. Outside current understanding. Zirian contemplated the disturbing possibility that humans operated according to principles that hegemony science had never encountered. Their ability to coordinate vast military operations suggested either advanced technology disguised as primitive systems or tactical methods based on concepts that galactic civilization had never developed. Supreme Admiral, incoming priority transmission from the High Council. The quantum chamber shifted to accommodate the collective consciousness of the hegemony's supreme governing body. 12 beings representing the most advanced species in galactic civilization materialized within the communication matrix, their combined awareness encompassing the strategic oversight of trillions of lives across thousands of star systems. Admiral Zirian resonated the collective voice of the Council, harmonics carrying undertones of barely controlled alarm. Current situation reports indicate that human influence is spreading beyond acceptable parameters. Client species across multiple sectors are experiencing unprecedented levels of unrest and rebellion. Zirian's consciousness darkened with the implications. The stability of galactic civilization depended on the acceptance of hegemony authority by client species. If humans were somehow inspiring rebellion among established populations, the threat extended far beyond military considerations. What is the nature of this human influence? Analysis indicates that humans are not using coercion or advanced psychological manipulation techniques. They appear to be simply communicating concepts of individual freedom and species independence. These ideas are proving unexpectedly attractive to populations that have accepted hegemony authority for generations. Individual freedom, species independence. These concepts struck at the fundamental assumptions upon which galactic order was based. The hegemony maintained stability by ensuring that all species understood their place within the greater structure of civilization. The idea that beings could choose different roles or reject established authority was not merely impractical. It was dangerous to the continuation of organized society. How are humans communicating these concepts to populations across multiple sectors? Investigations suggest that human ideas are spreading through communication networks that we have been unable to identify or intercept. Either humans possess infiltration capabilities beyond our detection, or their influence is spreading through social mechanisms that exist outside our current understanding. Social mechanisms outside current understanding. Zirian contemplated the possibility that humans possessed some form of ideological technology that could undermine the psychological conditioning that maintained galactic stability. This would represent a threat more dangerous than any military capability, as it could destabilize the foundation of civilization itself. What are the Council's directives regarding human containment? Human expansion must be terminated immediately through any necessary means. The Omega Protocol has been expanded to include authorization for planetary bombardment and biological warfare if conventional methods prove insufficient. The human threat to galactic stability cannot be allowed to continue. Planetary bombardment, biological warfare. Zirian processed these concepts with mechanical precision while struggling to comprehend how a single primitive species had prompted such extreme measures. The hegemony had not utilized such tactics since the early expansion wars over 8 centuries ago. Supreme Admiral, came another urgent communication from the tactical networks. Human fleet formations are approaching engagement range. Estimated strength exceeds 6,000 vessels organized into multiple attack groups. 6,000 vessels. Intelligence estimates had suggested total human military capacity of fewer than 500 ships. Either the estimates had been catastrophically wrong, or humans possessed production capabilities that defied every known model of industrial development. Coordinator Altair, initiate Operation Final Resolution. Deploy all available forces in overwhelming attack formations. Human resistance must be eliminated completely and decisively. As the massive hegemony fleet began moving toward engagement positions, Zirian reviewed tactical assessments of human military capabilities. The data streams revealed combat effectiveness that seemed to improve as tactical situations became more desperate and chaotic. Humans appear to thrive under conditions that would demoralize any rational species. The first engagement reports arrived within hours, and what Zirian observed challenged everything the Admiral understood about space warfare. Human ships moved through defensive formations with impossible precision, exploiting microscopic gaps in overlapping fields of fire that sophisticated targeting computers had calculated as impenetrable. More disturbing was the individual performance of human crews. They piloted their vessels through weapon fire that should have vaporized any organic pilot, threading between defensive systems with movements that seemed to predict enemy targeting in real time. Their ships sustained damage that would have disabled any other vessels, yet continued fighting with undiminished effectiveness. How are human pilots surviving conditions that would kill any biological operator? Altair processed the question while accessing combat recordings from across the engagement zones. Analysis indicates that humans are not using survival enhancement technology. They appear to be simply enduring conditions that should be lethal through determination and physiological adaptation. Simple endurance. Zirian struggled to process this concept within the framework of rational behavior. Every species in the hegemony utilized technological enhancement to survive the hostile conditions of space warfare. The idea that beings could function effectively through biological capability alone seemed impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. Supreme Admiral, we are receiving surrender notifications from multiple hegemony vessels across all engagement zones. This was beyond unprecedented. Hegemony crews were conditioned from birth for loyalty and obedience. The psychological frameworks that governed their thinking made surrender to primitive enemies impossible under normal circumstances. Explain these surrender incidents. Reports indicate that human crews are somehow convincing our personnel to defect during boarding actions. They're not using mind control or coercion techniques. Analysis suggests they're simply talking to our crews about concepts of personal choice and individual freedom. Personal choice, individual freedom. Zirian's consciousness recoiled from these concepts as from a psychological virus. The idea that beings could choose alternatives to their designated roles threatened the fundamental order upon which galactic civilization was based. What specific arguments are humans presenting to our crews? Preliminary analysis indicates they're discussing the possibility of lives lived according to personal preferences rather than assigned functions. They seem to be suggesting that beings could pursue individual goals and desires if they were not bound by hegemony authority. Individual goals and desires. The concepts were so alien to structured galactic thinking that Zirian struggled to understand how they could be appealing to conditioned personnel. Yet somehow humans were making these impossible ideas seem attractive enough to overcome a lifetime of psychological conditioning. Supreme Admiral, long-range sensors are detecting additional human fleet movements from multiple sectors. Total forces now exceed 8,000 vessels, with formations continuing to grow. 8,000 vessels. The number seemed impossible, yet sensor data confirmed its accuracy. Humans were not merely defending their territory. They were actively expanding their military presence across regions that should have been beyond their logistical capabilities. Zirian began to realize that the hegemony faced something unprecedented in galactic history. These humans were not simply another species to be conquered or integrated. They represented a fundamental challenge to the assumptions that had governed civilization for millennia. They fought not because victory was probable, but because defeat meant the end of everything they valued. They endured impossible hardships, not because the costs were reasonable, but because the alternatives were unthinkable. They inspired others not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through concepts that seemed to resonate with something deep in the consciousness of every thinking being. Supreme Admiral, came another urgent communication. We are receiving reports of mass defections from hegemony forces across 17 sectors. Client species populations are declaring independence and forming alliance with human forces. The rebellion is spreading faster than our strategic computers can calculate containment measures. Mass defections, alliance with humans. Zirian's consciousness struggled to process the implications of what was becoming a galactic revolution rather than a simple territorial conflict. The stable order that had governed the galaxy for over a millennium was beginning to collapse as species after species chose to follow human concepts rather than maintain traditional loyalties. For the first time in the Admiral's existence, Zirian contemplated the possibility that the hegemony had encountered something it could not overcome through conventional means. The humans possessed something more dangerous than advanced technology or superior numbers. They offered hope for alternatives to established order. As reports continued to stream and showing human influence spreading across multiple sectors like some form of ideological contagion, Zirian began to understand why the High Council had authorized such extreme measures. The humans represented an existential threat not just to hegemony expansion, but to the continuation of galactic civilization as it had existed for over 1,000 years. The war with humanity had become a struggle for the future of the galaxy itself, and for the first time in its existence, the hegemony was not certain of victory.